Hello, beautiful souls. I'm Jenny Aiello, and this is With Love, Jenny, a podcast where we meet ourselves right in the heart of our vulnerability and authenticity. In this sacred space where it's just you and I dive into real life, rich with wisdom and opportunities for deep healing. I explore what it means to truly connect to ourselves, to each other, and to something much greater than us all. In each podcast, I like to meet life right where it touches us most, in our tenderness, in our truth, in our struggles and our strength. So wherever you are on your journey, or whatever it is that you're carrying, no matter how light or heavy, just know I'm so grateful that you're here with me today. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's begin today's episode. My partner won't change, and I can't take it anymore. That's the common theme that shows up when my husband and I do relationship coaching. For those who don't know this, my husband, Bob, who is a clinical psychologist and a relationship coach, works with me to help couples find their way to a healthy relationship with themselves first and then with each other. Sometimes that means they have to do it apart, but our hope is that it leads to a long-lasting, healthy relationship that continues to help them heal, transform, and grow. I'm Jenny, and this is With Love, Jenny, a podcast about life and our life stories. So thank you for listening today. Kristen and I are going to explore how our primary relationship can reveal our own healing map if we can get to a certain mindset for growth and healing. This is geared toward primary relationships, but it can be friendships, it can be family members, extended family members, it can be parents, and it can be children. I believe that we choose the people in our lives, especially our partners, that are meant to help us heal ourselves. The purpose of that partner being in our life is not to rescue us, have our back, have great sex, or make all our dreams come true. It's actually to help us heal. And the longer we are in a relationship, the closer we get to our deepest wounds. Sometimes when couples come to us, they are at the edge of their deepest wounds, which means that they're at the end of their coping mechanisms. That's when the big healing opportunity presents itself. Relationships have to reveal what is inside of us that needs to heal, and the entire relationship depends on that healing to happen. But rather than pointing to the partner as the problem, we have to learn to look in the mirror every time, every argument, every disagreement, every uncomfortable moment reflects back to us something that needs to heal. Too often, and I know in my case, Bob can do something to trigger me, and the thing he did is so blatantly obvious that it's easy to say, well, of course that was unacceptable, right? And I give him plenty of reason to say, come on, Jenny, that wasn't nice. He's right. I'm right. We can be right or we can be married. And that means we have to look at, why did I get triggered by that? Why, instead of pointing the finger at him, why did I feel triggered instead of just neutral whenever he did something that he did that messed up? So we're going to dive into this topic today and dissect triggers, trauma, how trauma bonds work, because almost every relationship is a trauma bond. Every relationship that we choose is chosen as a trauma bond to give us the opportunity to heal. And some people say we choose our parents before we come, and that's to heal the trauma bonds of generations. Some people don't buy into that philosophy, and that's okay. We can work with the here and now just fine and still have plenty of work to do. I know it's hard. I know when people come to us and I put this philosophy in front of them, I know we're going to be inviting them to go deep, and I can hang out in that deep water with them forever, as long as they're willing to look internally and not get stuck in their own coping stance. Once someone gets their ego involved, they're in their coping stance and they are right about their coping stance and they defend their coping stance and they aren't budging, then our work has to stop because they're not willing to grow. They're not willing to go to the next level of healing. And that's as good as it's going to get for them until they are. Most of this work that Bob and I do, and a lot of what we're going to talk about today, is a combination of things we've learned and studied from people like Terry Real, Carol McCall, Pia Melody, Virginia Satir, training we've done in trauma coaching, lots of books we've read, mentors we've had, and of always online learning. So let's dive into some of the basics of trauma and more specifically, trauma bonding. That may be a new word for you, and it may be something that you've heard about but are curious about. I hope you'll stay and listen because this is rich. When we attract partners who are going to help us heal, it doesn't happen in a fairy tale way. I think some of us women especially, and I might be insulting someone by saying this, but I'm going to say for me personally, I adopted the belief that there was a fairy tale version of relationships. I believed in the sweetness of the relationship, of the sacredness of the partnership and the heroism that came with that relationship. Like, oh, I'm safe now. I'm safe with you. The romantic version that really is what begins the relationship. And I believed that's the way it would stay. And in my first marriage, I learned even before the marriage, for the 4 years we dated in college, that fairy tale version wasn't working. We were both quickly triggered by all kinds of different stories that played out in that relationship. It continues my 38 years of marriage with my second husband, Bob. We're still triggered. We just had a trigger yesterday. And the good news is from learning all this stuff that I'm sharing with you in this podcast, we're living proof of what works. Our relationship gets lots of fun and laughter and adventure and things we both love, individually and together. But equally as much, we get to keep healing. We keep finding things inside of us that are connected to a deeper wound that is still in need of healing. And we use our relationship that way. We look at it now. Okay, I got triggered, my turn, I get to do some healing, or he does the same. And it's a partnership of growth. And that is what builds really, really strong bonds that help marriages. Marriages have to face all kinds of challenges, illness, kids, finances, jobs, time management, partnership and household responsibilities. Like it's a lot in a marriage. And those things can reveal so much about what needs to happen for us to heal. It all leads back to that. It all leads us home into our heart, into our inner child or the shadow part of us. There's so many words for that area of triggers. It all leads us back to that so that it can heal. And I believe that we aren't meant to live on the surface where we're in a honeymoon phase. When we first start dating our partner, we're on our best behavior. We show our best qualities. We don't show up picking fights. We don't even know what to pick a fight about when we first show up. We're there to impress, consciously or unconsciously. And I don't think I've ever met a couple who stayed together after a first date fight. If they ever had a first date and they fought, they didn't go out again. And I always wonder what would happen if they had said, let's try that again. And if they learned that when their relationship was at its worst, each person showed up like it was their first date all over again, showing only their best side. But we're not meant to live that way. We're just not meant to be in a relationship that is on the surface, afraid to go into the depth of who we are, afraid to go into the depth where our trauma lives. We're not designed to do that. Relationships aren't designed to live on the surface. They're designed to heal, to help us each heal. So we start our relationship kind of in that fairy tale way. And as time goes by, we move into another phase, and that's where we start to notice the triggers. We start to have problems. We start to have arguments. We start to have disagreements. We start to cope with something. And this is where it gets really interesting, because at some point, one partner does something, it triggers the other. And what we have to understand is this chain reaction of whatever this person does triggers me. That trigger is rooted in a deeper wound or trauma that I carry. Everyone has them. Everyone carries some form of trauma. So I want us to start there and talk about trauma. We just, this past September, did a retreat in Sedona, a women's retreat. And one of the things we did at the women's retreat was address some of our own childhood trauma. And we identified it in a different way, that it's not the obvious. It's not a big event that happened. Sometimes trauma is passive trauma. It's daily things that did or didn't happen. If you listen to the podcast with Grace Scarborough, who talked about somatic experience as a way of releasing trauma from our nervous system, you would have learned a lot about what I'm talking about. But one of the things that Grace taught me and used with both Kristen and I is that when we have trauma, the definition comes from something that was too much or too fast. Things came in too quickly for us to cognitively process. There was just too much. Since then, learning about all of that, I've also learned from other mentors that it can also be not enough. Things that weren't there. There wasn't enough of something ever or at a time in need. In a moment, there wasn't something, or over time, there wasn't enough of it. And so let's talk about what those things are. At the retreat, I had everyone in beautiful Sedona. We sat in beautiful vortex energy out there, and they had to look at their relationships with their parents. And so I'm going to ask you all to do this. If you think about your father right now, list things that maybe there was too much of, and then make a list of things there might not have been enough of. And I'm going to give you some examples. For some, there was too much yelling. There was too much anger. There was too much criticism. There was too much rigidity. There was too much arguing. There was too much absence, abuse, teasing, rejection, too much invalidation. That was big for me. So in these little moments, and you have talked about my relationship with my dad, but living in my house, my brothers were all the stars of the family, and whatever I brought to the family didn't get validated. There was too much other stuff going on. There was too much chaos. What could be examples where maybe there wasn't enough? And this is the one where, especially with my mom, I did the not enough, too much with my mom. And that's when I really found a big area of healing for me. And it wasn't a surprise of the not enough, but it was a recognition that just because I understood, she was busy, she was overwhelmed, she was trying her best to get everything done. You know, she was doing her level best. And in that process, and being the youngest, I got whatever energy was left over, right? And I understood that. So I never had anger about it. But what I didn't realize was how important that engagement, that nurturing, that being held, that being heard, that being cared for in really a nurturing way, how much I was kept fed and clothed and I was loved. I mean, I always knew that, but I didn't get nurtured as much as I think I needed. So that left a hole that I had to kind of fill. So those are some examples of things that wounded if there was not enough of it or too much of it. So I want to invite you to use that tool of having like not enough or too much of something growing up. And it could be from siblings. It could be just the family in general. There was too much of something. Every single one of those taught us to cope. Terry Real calls it the adaptive child shows up. The adaptive child says, this is happening. I have to learn how to navigate it. It's not on a conscious thought. It's almost a subconscious programming that starts happening, but we learn how to cope with it. And there's all kinds of coping strategies. And we'll probably talk about some of those coping strategies in another podcast, but I'm going to list some because they're really big. It's really big when you start to notice how you cope with things. One classic is dissociation. Some people learn to cope by procrastinating. You might go into an avoidance, just shut everything down. Some coping strategies look like an eating disorder. Another coping strategy can be like always for me, it was looking for a way to be better, to do better. I would cope by that didn't work. I need to do something that works, and works depends on if everybody's pleased with me. So people pleasing is a huge coping strategy for me. It can lead to addiction. It can lead to depression. There's all these ways that, believe it or not, while we look at those as symptomatic, they're actually coping. It's how we're coping. And they're the signal that something's wrong and I'm having to cope with it because I am excessively people pleasing, or I am depressed, or I feel my anxiety, or I notice that I'm eating too much, or I notice that I don't feel anything when I should, or I'm developing bad habits, and the bad habits are developing into addictions. All of those things are just someone who's deeply hurting and they're trying to cope with life. So trauma shows up in those coping mechanisms. It's in an action, it's in behaviors, it's in what you won't do. Sometimes it's, I know I need to do it and I just can't bring myself to do it. So the first part of this is understanding trauma, understanding we all have it. It doesn't need to go into judgment about that. We don't need to label it as something to be ashamed of. Everybody has that. It's hard to be a human. It's hard in this world. Right now, it feels really hard to be a human in the world right now. And everybody's coping with uncertainty and coping with big stuff. I know here in North Carolina, we're still coping with the recovery of that horrible catastrophic storm that swept through at the end of September, and people are still displaced. And I mean, the coping, that was trauma. And we're all feeling that trauma, even if it didn't happen to us, when there's a natural disaster. So let's talk about it. We have trauma. The trauma gets revealed through our triggers. When someone triggers us, where do we go? The very next place we go is to blame someone or something that caused us to feel the trigger. This is the second phase of a relationship. In the trigger phase is where relationships will get stuck for decades and they just, it's just, he won't change, or I need to just fix this in her and then we'll be okay. That's not where the work is. That might be true, but it's a boundary violation in the first place to step over the triggers and blame someone for making you feel something that lives inside of you and needs to be healed. It's always something in you. And saying, I want to fix you so I can be okay is kind of an arrogant statement. If you would just do this, then I wouldn't have to feel my anxiety. And we expect them to take care of our feelings in a relationship sometimes. I will say there's times when that is needed. There is times where there needs to be compassion and there needs to be understanding and there needs to be empathy. But we don't have to blame and we don't have to dissociate from it. We don't have to distract. A lot of times we distract them from looking in the mirror by starting another argument. a lot of times, and it blows up. And so there might be someone to blame. We might actually run away from it, dissociate, or just walk away. That's being in flight. So there's the fight, flight, trauma symptoms. So when we run from the fight, we are in trauma. If we argue relentlessly and we won't let it go, we're in fight. And this one is subtle and difficult to catch, but we also could end up projecting our own wounds onto that other person and say they're doing the very thing that we are not addressing in our wound. Projection is huge. I'm going to explore the relationship between projection and gaslighting. To me, they mimic if they aren't the very same thing in two different words. It's taking what I'm doing and saying you're doing it and causing the person to feel like they're going insane. And all of that is just simply a cry from a wound, of trauma wound. So if you're listening to what the other person is saying when they triggered you, you'll hear the voice of that person's wound. And you have to treat that very respectfully and not exploit it. And that's when I see couples that come to us where their fighting gets toxic. That's what I call it. We've moved from trigger to toxic triggers. It might sound like it's about you, but it's really revealing what's hurting inside of them. So a trigger reveals the trauma, and the trauma shows us our coping strategies and an opportunity to heal rather than blame or project or avoid or focus on changing someone else. Every single wound you carry has an adaptive behavior or a coping strategy attached to it. So, Kristen, let's open this up to some discussion for now. What shows up for you in this and how does it land? Because when I present a lot of this and when I know I've gone as far as I can, Bob and I, we do a lot of couples work and we get to a place where one person is in that growth cycle, which is the last one. You know, we are in the honeymoon phase, then we're in the trigger, then we are in the revealing our trauma phase. Then we get into sometimes the toxic fighting phase. But if they transcend that last step is, I'm ready to look inside and see what can I heal? Where do I go to do that work? And that's that growth cycle. That's a portal of enormous healing and growth, but they have to surrender from the fight. They have to lay their sword down and come to the call looking at, when I get triggered, I have to see what's happening inside of me and explore it. And they have to be in a partnership to allow the space for that without interrupting and injecting opinions about it. And it's in that growth that couples strengthen. So out of all of that, what lands for you? Where do you identify with any of this? Where do you apply it even outside of a marriage? You know, is there a place that this applies that's harder than even like, because, you know, marriages all have their stuff, but you might have other people that trigger more than that. I always love hearing your insights.
Well, this brought up a story that just happened recently with my husband. And then I'm kind of like thinking about it from a healed perspective, trying to look at it from a different angle instead of getting upset. But earlier this week, I actually had to go into work, which is a lot for me because it's far away. You know, I can't keep up with things at home. Like I have a routine because I work at home. Mm-hmm. And you don't realize how hard it is on a working mom to actually have to go somewhere and then come back and take care of the house. So I came home and started working again. And then Chris comes home and he falls asleep on the couch. And I'm like getting angry. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm making dinner. Like I got so pent up. I'm like, I did so much today. And he just comes home and falls asleep. And I got so mad, but I let it go because I do know like he is on the go all day. Like he's constantly talking to people. He is constantly networking and he didn't ask me to make dinner. We could have said it was a cereal night or a quesadilla night, whatever. I decided to make spaghetti and the whole time I'm making it, I'm angry because I hear him snoring. So I'm like, okay, that's the situation. I'm triggered. as you're talking. I'm like, what's the trauma? And I kind of have two conflicting things going on at one time. I have learned through my childhood that I can only depend on myself, in a sense, for my needs. So I don't let people be the director of what's happening.
Right.
But also, as a child, a lot was put on my shoulders. I was the oldest. I kept the house clean. One, because nobody would clean it, and I felt more comfortable in a clean house. I was cooking dinner for my sisters in 5th grade. I was coming home after school and taking care of them. Like, it was a lot. So the trigger is, I think, that I just want to be taken care of sometimes.
Right.
And I want it to be recognized.
Right.
And I did use my voice on Halloween, and I said, "Can you make dinner?" And he said, "Yes." And that could have been a huge 2-day fight not talking to each other, which we are way past that kind of fighting, thanks to Jenny.
Yeah.
But that's how I kind of related to what you've been talking about. I don't know if that helps people put that into perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Great story about it could have stayed in the trigger lane of you're sleeping. You know, we both worked all day. I'm tired too. I'd like to take a nap, but we have kids to feed. We have a house. We have chores. We have stuff. You're over there snoring. I'm the one has to be. That was all a trigger that showed the wound, which was you didn't get that. There wasn't enough of, let me take care of you, Kristen.
Right.
You had too much responsibility at a young age. You had too much put on your shoulders to be cooking dinner for your sisters at a young age instead of having a parent functioning, right? And so rather than blaming Chris for laying down and taking care of himself, right? We could put all kinds of things. Well, that was selfish, or that was, bad of him to expect you to do that. We could blame him, and we could build a whole story of blame, which is where typical couples will go. And we have to stop that and say, one, what am I feeling right now? I know that we had in my newsletter, I forget which month it was, we did a list of triggers that go off when we have the feeling. And then actually, what is the feeling? And the feeling is like a guiding light to the wound, right? And that's what you did. Like, why am I feeling this? And when did I feel that? Sometimes when we're feeling something, or when we're coaching a couple and they're feeling something, one of us will ask them, how old do you feel right now? And it's funny how quickly they'll say 7, and we'll say, what happened at 7? And they'll tell the story of that feeling, and they're back in it again. It's not really the reality of the current situation. It's the unhealed wound from when they were 7 that's projecting onto this situation. Just like, Chris didn't ask me to make dinner. I could have said, hey, when you wake up, will you help make dinner? Or we could have cereal and make it easy. I didn't have to make a big dinner for everybody. You made it hard on yourself. In that trigger reaction, it's sort of like, I got to show you, I got to make a whole dinner now when you really didn't have to, but you did what you did as a child of, I have to make a nice meal for my sisters.
Yeah. And if I would have told him where I was coming from and he would have told me about his day, he would have been like, let's just order food.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't out of spite. He wasn't doing that.
He wasn't doing it to hurt you.
And my mom was a single mom. She didn't do it to hurt me, but it still was an age where I don't think I should have had that much responsibility.
Right.
I should have been able to be a kid.
There's a lot in that statement you just said. She didn't do it to intentionally hurt me, but we have to recognize when we're children, we're not adults. And you were taking on the role of parent in 5th grade. There's situations where we teach our kids responsibility, and that's good. We can argue that builds character, and there's all kinds of things at appropriate levels. But ongoing, where that was your job, and the part that didn't happen, so that was too much responsibility and not enough validation, acknowledgement, appreciation, relief. You didn't have enough relief from that responsibility. And so if you look at it in the terms of what you were having to do every day after school, there was a lot of too much and there was a lot of not enough. And because of that, it left the wound. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I never came home to a Leave It to Beaver house with my mom making snacks for me. Like, no.
Or even a clean house unless you did it.
Right.
Yeah. And so those things matter. It's what's the too much part? What's the not enough part? How did that create my trauma? Which can go into, for some, it can be hoarding. And for others, it can be disinfecting everything. It's like, I'm not okay if everything in my house isn't crystal clean, pristine. I know Bob had a lot of what I called OCD tendencies about how clean and decluttered our house was when I was raising 5 kids. Like, I couldn't make it stay for a minute. I could get one room done and the other 4 were out of control, and I had to do more for Bob to be okay. And I had to let Bob do what he needed to do to make it okay for him and not take it personally. Like, if I cleaned the kitchen and he went behind me, like I didn't do it good enough, it would trigger me. And I had to realize that wasn't about me. I did it. It was clean. The dishes were done. The counters were clean. I swept the floor. But if I didn't scrub the floor with a mop and I didn't scrub the counters down and I didn't Clorox the whole sink, it was like it went over the top for him. And I was like, I cleaned it to where it was clean enough for me and he gets to clean it enough for him. It has no reflection on whether I did it good enough. And I had to do that. I had to heal that and just let him do what he needed to do after that. And understand, like, where is that balance? And then when you start looking at your growth from those trauma triggers in the relationship just points to your work. That's all. It's just pointing to your work. So when we make progress in relationship coaching, it's the progress is made when each person is really doing deep work with themselves. The more we heal our traumas, the less triggers that go off. And it could take all your whole lifetime of years together to get to the end of healing traumas. And, I don't know if anybody ever finishes, but you do get the big traumas. You hit those first. Those wounds are easier to find. So as you heal them and diminish them, at least, my coach said, we start with the boulders. We move to the small boulders. We move to the big rocks. Then we move to the smaller rocks. Then we move to the gravel. Then we move to the sand. And you end your journey with triggers are the size of a grain of sand. And I think that at that point, you've learned enough about life to know that those aren't really worth it. It's like you don't give up your peace for them anymore. But couples usually come to us when they're in the boulder stage, the big boulder stage. And we have to individually identify what are those big boulder traumas for you. And then once you've identified them, this happens so often. If you know that that's my trigger, don't poke the bear. Like, your job is just never poke it. And then I don't have to deal with it.
But then you're walking around landmines, which I've learned to do very well.
Yeah. Coping mechanism.
Don't step on people's landmines.
Yeah. And then we can't authentically show up. And then we crave the authentic connection and we lose intimacy. When you're on eggshells, dancing around landmines, you lose your intimacy with your partner because you can't be safe.
You almost feel out of body too, because you lose your center.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you're just trying to concentrate on.
Yeah.
And I'm not even thinking about Chris. I'm thinking about different relatives, people in my life.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
It's hard to just be there because you're trying to protect all those wounds. As sometimes, during holidays or family reunions, or weddings or funerals, when family of origin comes back together, that's what it's like for a lot of people, is that they know how to push the buttons. Half of them installed those buttons. And so it's like we're so busy protecting ourselves from having someone poke the trigger, expose the trauma, and then we have to collect ourselves and stitch ourselves back together and not lose it on somebody. And wouldn't it be nice if we were all just safe to be where we are? And if we lose it, have that person not, but typically, and this is an important part when I interrupted my own self with that thought, but if we're safe to share our triggers and traumas and recognize what's going on with you right now. And when that very trigger, the coping is to blame. So you're getting blamed at the same time we're asking you to say, rather than react to being blamed and defend yourself, move in, show compassion, meet them where they are. What do you need right now? What's happening? Tell me what you're feeling. I'm sorry I've triggered you, but how can I help you right now? Without it being patronizing, but genuine, authentic care. But it's hard to do that when you have to put your shield up or your armor on because you're under attack. And sometimes you just have to guard yourself till they finish. Then you move in. And when someone's triggered and they're attacking you and saying awful things to you, oh, it's so easy to become righteous, right? Like, you just called me that. You just said the unforgivable, and now you're blaming because they were blaming you when they got triggered. Now both of your traumas are fighting with each other.
That reminds me of a story, and Johnny will only get this, but when someone said to me, I just don't know what Kristen eats these days.
Yeah.
They were triggered about something.
Yeah.
And then I got triggered because I felt like that was
a problem.
Not a nice thing to say.
Right. You got judgy about that wasn't very nice. And it made me feel like something's wrong with me. Right.
Right.
And so then we go into that wound. What was coming up for you with that? Why would it be a trigger in the first place? Why not say, okay, well, just let me know and I'll tell you what I eat these days,
I felt scrutinized.
Okay. So when in your childhood did you feel scrutinized?
Plenty of times in certain situations.
Okay. Yeah. So it went back, right?
Yeah.
There's usually never a question mark over, I don't know. I never felt that way before. We always can go back unless we have completely dissociated from that trauma and we don't remember it at all. That's a whole different category of, there's a level of healing that has to happen that's very trauma informed. Deep healing. It's very, very deep work and it's hard. Traditional therapy sometimes re-traumatizes that deep trauma by retelling all the story. And it's great because there's so many people, professional people leading the way in new ways to deal with our trauma. And we're just now recognizing trauma doesn't belong to people who fought wars or witnessed horrific events. Trauma is in every single human being. It might be a different level of trauma, but we all carry trauma. And because we've had not enough and we've had too much and we've had too much too fast to process, everyone. And so it's taking that on, and this new frontier of trauma research, they're finding ways to treat it that doesn't mean relive it. Because if we relive it, we're re-traumatizing ourselves a lot of times. Dissociated people don't want to do that. So it's learning, how do we release it if you don't remember it? How do we deal with it if you can't even connect to it? There are ways. So if you find yourself in deep trauma coping mechanisms of things that have led to big problems in your life through addictions or eating disorders or immobilizing depression and anxiety, you want a good approach to that trauma and heal. You can. I believe that all trauma wounds can heal. We know enough now in our world of psychology and treatment of disorders that trauma wounds do heal. You just have to get the right therapist and be ready to do the work and not be afraid of doing the work, because nobody wants to be traumatized again. So you have to be in safe hands. You do have to have someone who recognizes these things and can guide you. You can't do it yourself. You do need help. But if you will do this work, your relationship with yourself is easier. You're not walking on eggshells. You're not people pleasing. You're not developing bad self-destructing, self-sabotaging habits. You begin to heal. And it's in your healing that the relationship heals, even if the other person doesn't do that. The relationship gets better because there's less triggers, but you have to do the work.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note too that when you embark on this journey, don't go into it thinking, okay, 12 months from now, I'll be healed.
Yeah. Some people actually think one session.
Well, yes, I know people think that. I'm saying from experience of doing deep work for over 5 years.
Yeah.
It still comes back sometime. I mean, it will.
It's still there.
It's still there.
And you heal it. And I equate it to like our trauma is like a disease in our body that you can't see with x-rays and physical testing. But if someone has a tumor and they get radiation, they usually have more than one radiation treatment and it shrinks the tumor, right? So that it's manageable to deal with or it goes away completely. And they combine that with different treatments depending on what it is. I see trauma the same way. We have to work on it to diminish it. Like we want to shrink the wound, but we also want to put healing energy around it. Like we want to do something with it.
Well, and I'm thinking too, like if we're going to do the radiation analogy, your body could not handle the amount of radiation needed in one session to get rid of it.
Right.
Like there's no way.
That would be trauma.
And also, while you're going through the steps of radiation, it's like you're getting sick, like things are happening. Like you have to expect that it's not going to be a beautiful journey.
Right.
Because you're healing really dark, icky things.
Right. And that's a really good point because people think things will start to get better right away or they'll feel better right away. Actually, a lot of people do feel better at the end of one of our sessions in that they get clarity about what's happening.
Right. Like you get a tiny bit of relief, like you get a glimpse of the feeling.
Right. And that gives them hope.
Right.
And sometimes they get in it and get stuck again and they don't feel good and they keep going. I mean, there's been times when I've worked with you that you're like, this didn't feel good. And we get back in it. And then till we do feel that next better feeling. But sometimes you have to go in it to get through it. I always say you have to feel it to heal it. And feeling it doesn't feel good. And we have to keep going. And that's why in my coaching programs, I rarely want to work with someone for less than a year. If they're here, I work with people that want to do life-changing work. They want to do, they're fed up, they're tired, they can't carry the tumor of trauma any longer, and they want to dive in. And I love that because I'm invested in that. I'm invested in people healing and growing and transforming their life. And it doesn't happen in 2 sessions or 6 sessions or inconsistent when they get triggered and come back and fix the story, but don't do the deep work. I just expect them to kind of come back and come back and come back without doing the deep work. After a while, it's like, what are we doing here? Right? Are you ready? And sometimes
you have to be open. And one thing Jenny is really, really good at least with me in a session, getting me out of a stuck pattern.
Yeah.
Even though I could maybe go back to it after the session, she can get me out of it for a little bit and get me to see a different perspective. But it's not easy. But she stays with me. And I have never really had someone do that. And I would thank her all the time. I don't think she really realizes, but to have someone stick with you while you're kicking and screaming mentally and not give up on you. Oh my God.
That's a cornerstone of my coaching. When I say I'm invested, that's what I mean.
Right.
I'll let you be however you need to be. Right? If you're doing this work and you're taking yourself on, I expect you to get stuck. Sometimes you will have the biggest temper tantrum, not just you, Kristen, but all my clients, when they're doing the deep work. I've had people just get so mad at me. And I know they're not mad at me. They're feeling their anger and I'm there witnessing it. And I'm able to stand with that all day long.
Does that mean that you're getting close to a wound?
Yeah,
okay.
I get excited. You've heard me say that. I love it when people cry. I love when they get triggered because then we're getting closer to the trauma that they're carrying. We're getting closer to that wound. And my job is to keep lighting the pathway and leading you forward to the degree you can handle it
Right. That's important.
If you pictured in your mind right now, there's a deep pond up ahead on a trail. And I know the trail really, really well. I've been there many times with people. And I'm walking with you along this trail. And we have to navigate a big patch of briars, right? And I have to help you navigate. And you get tangled up in the briars and you're bleeding and your leg is cut. And you're like, this sucks. Why are you doing this to me? Why did you bring me here? You put me in this painful briar patch. And I know that we have to get through the briar patch and then we have to get through rock climbing or something. And then but we're getting to this pond. And when we get to the pond, we're gazing into a wound. It's not even refreshing. It's like, oh, here it is. And we heal and we recognize it and we swim in that wound together and quit being afraid of it and put love and light and healing around it. And this is not the kind of, some wounds are filled with toxicity and we don't want to jump in them. That's where you have to have real good therapists or coaches that know the difference, right? Like if at that end, the pool is a toxic waste dump, we're not jumping in together. But if it's just a childhood wound that, I don't mean to use just, but compared to a toxic pool, if it's something we can go through and you just need to feel it and say, you hurt me. You go back in that and say, you hurt me. And that is why I have this wound. And I give that back. And I am loving myself. I am loving that part, not shaming that part. And I can do life differently now. And I watch it. It's beautiful work when we get there and we get to do that. Sometimes we get to the briar patch and people turn back and they aren't ready. And we do work to get stronger and more perspective and more prepared. And then we go back and it's like, okay, this time I can do it. I'm going to tell a quick story about something that happened at the retreat that we did in Sedona. And we had a particular hike that was particularly challenging. And all of us went on the same hike. And out of all the women, everyone had a different experience. Some were like squirrels. They just rock climbed up into this space and navigated steep. There was no flat surface up there. So they navigated the steep wall sides, like no problem. Others faced enormous fear of heights. Others faced enormous fear of falling through, falling back down, and had to the degree of complete anxiety, paralysis, anger, all their stuff showed up, which is the point of what the hike was about, right? And when we got off of that hike, one in particular who didn't have a good experience at all, had to face so much of her anxiety and fears and panic, and her heart was racing. And I mean, we kept her safe and got back down. But one of the things she said was, I'll never do this ever, ever, ever again. Like, no way, no how, not happening. But as she settled down, she actually felt strong because she walked through her own fear. She was no longer able to say, I can't do that, because she did it. And she was funny because she was like, not that I will ever do that again, but I like knowing I can. And that is the beginning of an enormous healing process.
That reminds me of a story real quick. After I had been doing work with Jenny, I don't know why this thought came in my head, but we were going to Grandfather Mountain in North Carolina. And those of you that are familiar with Grandfather Mountain, there's a mile-high swinging bridge. And I am deathly afraid of heights. So I am like, you know what? I have done all this work. I want to show myself that I can get over a huge fear. It was horrible. It wasn't this graduation thing that I thought was going to happen. I walk across so fast. I could not look down. I could only look straight ahead. I got to the other side. I felt like I was going to throw up, literally.
Yep.
And my boys and my husband were like climbing the rocks, going even further on the other side. I'm like, I'm sitting right here. I literally cannot move.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I could make it back to the other side. We took like 20 minutes before I could do it. And I'm not proud of myself. We started walking back, and my youngest on the bridge, we're on the bridge, my youngest, who has no fear, leans over to look. I grabbed his shoulder so hard, I felt like I almost dislocated it. It freaked me out. I felt like we were all going to fall together. I felt like I was losing my ground, which just is probably symbolic to Jenny. And we get to the other side. I'm like, I hated that. I'm never doing it again. But now I feel like, should I try it again?
I would invite you to, although you picked a pretty graduate level course to conquer a fear. I've been on that, and I was there on a windy day. If you do get over the Mile High Bridge, there's no way to get back without going over it again. So if you have a fear of heights, you've got double trouble. But I think that, and some people would say, don't go re-traumatize yourself, right? I would say, yeah, don't use that as your way of doing it. But we know, you and I working together, you also have a fear of falling through, the floor collapsing underneath you. And
I never put this together till now.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Oh, yeah. She always has a fear of being on the upstairs and having the floor fall through.
Like it can't handle the weight.
It can't handle the weight. And that's an emotional feeling of, let's go back to your childhood of being in the 5th grade and feeling like I can't handle the weight of this. I'm going to implode, right? And I have to find more coping strategies in that emotional world. And it's translated and gone forward with, you can't put heavy furniture on the 2nd floor. It might fall through,
And I need to be as tiny as possible. Like, this is like so many ahas on this moment.
Yes. And here you are, little tiny Kristen, going across a mile-high bridge with, it's not like it's a swinging bridge, you guys. So if you haven't been on it, it's not like a highway. It's a little sidewalk swinging over a mile up in the air.
Between 2 mountains.
Between 2 mountains. And so for you to take that on, part of me knows that you have this, you love the challenge of personal growth. You love taking yourself on. You love challenging your fears because you are so determined to live a life free of anxiety. So I don't want you to re-traumatize yourself or have a setback from doing it again. But I think I would entertain the thought of, if I did this time, knowing that I was able to go and do it and nothing bad happened, you're reinforcing that something good happened, right? And
yeah, like I would like to healthily take in the feeling of expansion instead of going into tunnel vision and control and focus.
Right. And maybe this time, stop and do some breathing. Stop and use some tools halfway across or before you start. Maybe practice moving slow instead of fast as long as you can. And then maybe halfway you go ahead and run for the finish line. But you might actually find you don't have to look over the edge. You don't have to look side to side. You can just stay focused and just move slowly. Because what have we learned from Grace is that releases your trauma.
Yeah.
Releases it, right? So moving fast probably fed the anxiety. Like, I'm running because I'm in my anxiety. This is my flight. I have to get away, rather than slowing down. And even just going 10 feet and turning around and coming back. You don't have to go the whole distance. So saying to yourself, without challenging yourself too much, because then you have too much, right? Too much is a signal of trauma. I did too much that day. I didn't give myself enough grace and kindness and support. Like, the key to this is I can support myself.
It's almost like, too, the analogy of with the cancer, but walking over the bridge slowly to heal.
Yeah. It's a process. Right.
Because then you could get sloppy and you could fall.
Right. That could have been more dangerous than the other way. So, yeah. So good stories wrapped around our traumas and our triggers. And thank you, Kristen, for these examples of just personal triggers that, get self-created in an adventure day with your family, or how you and Chris, getting triggered by Chris and the way that he handled things in the story. In the old, when we first started working, you all did have that, where we were off to the races over those kinds of stories, and they weren't even true, which was a trauma trigger for Chris. It's like, that's not even what I was doing. All you had to do was ask. I would be like, we're going to just do takeout, or we're going to, I'll help you solve the problem. I'm tired too. He didn't have an expectation of you, but your childhood wound had that expectation of you, right?
Right.
And so those stories, I hope, have helped our listeners today. We would love to hear from you guys about what is happening and how hard is it for you when someone hurts your feelings, when someone pisses you off, when someone lights the match to your dynamite keg. How hard is it for you to accept responsibility that is about you?
Extremely.
It's hard, right? But how willing are you to entertain that? Because I promise you, when you start to do this work and you start to explore and be curious about your own triggers instead of coping with them through blaming or projecting or dissociating or doing all those coping mechanisms, I promise you, your life will get better and better and better. You will have so many good days, and then you might still have a trigger because we're still going to always heal. We don't get the fairy tale version of life, but you will find more peace. And you will find that doing this work, I think the biggest and best byproduct is you are learning to trust yourself, to take care of yourself when you're triggered. Because the world's full of people that are going to poke you. There's stuff all around us, and we have to cope with it all the time. But when we've healed and we've given ourselves the message that says, I'm okay. I've got you. I can take care of us. I don't have to feel like a victim. You're not making me feel like a victim. My story makes me feel like a victim. There is a huge difference. Even when there's overwhelming evidence and they're calling you a victim or victimizing you, my story about this is up to me, how I handle it. I always say that people do have situations where they are victimized.
Well, I'm thinking too, like if they're coming at you with their trauma, which you have to understand it's their trauma, which is really hard to understand because you think it's you, and you react in a healthy way, it will maybe one, anger them, but two, might make them stop and be like, okay, what's happening here? This is a different reaction than I thought.
Right. I see it as like a runaway train. It's like it can't stop itself. When someone's triggered, you have to let it get to the end. It might have to crash, okay, then give everybody a minute and then say, now let's talk about what happened.
Yeah. Like how can you become the observer and not get triggered by what's happening?
You have to get out of the way. You have to remove yourself. That's where you personally have to put boundaries up, but not shut them out and not let it trigger you to add fuel to the flame, right?
Yeah. And I'm learning that in a deep way right now with a lesson that's going on.
Yeah. You have to have your boundaries, and not with anger and not with resentment, but with love. And this is new and not easy in the midst of a trigger. It really is hard work. But in the moment, the way I start when Bob and I are coaching couples, it's like the awareness of what's happening is the first part. If they aren't able to catch it before it happens, before the big fight that leaves everybody a bloody mess, then not literally, hopefully, but emotionally, and they come, it's like, okay, we can unpack this. But they have to have an understanding that unpacking it means they have to look inside themselves to figure it out. We do that. It's always good when they come on the call with a fresh story. Friday, we had this big thing happen. They tell the story, then we unpack the story because it's fresh and it's raw and it's real, and we heal a lot of that if both of them are doing their part of that. Sometimes it's one person's trauma, so we focus on one person. Sometimes it's the other person's trauma, but they're not willing to do their work yet, so we don't get to it yet. And it shows up in the next call when there's a fresh new story. But working in hindsight is level one. Then finding a big breakthrough happens when they say, we caught it and we did it differently. Like you just shared with what you did with dinner, right?
Right. Because I feel like before you start like doing any work, when you do get triggered, it turns on a certain part of your brain and you're not rational. Like you have no tools.
Yes. You forget them all.
It is the train wreck. It's going to happen. no matter what. And Jenny and I try to nail this home a lot. This is why it's so important to have your meditation and quiet time so you can rely on that, even if it's after the fact, of like, okay, how can I get a different perspective on this? What is really happening? And that makes you feel like an adult when you can ask those questions after because usually when you fight, it's like the 12-year-old against the 12-year-old, even though you're both married for 20 years or whatever.
You could be 60 and act 12, right? And the 12-year-olds are fighting with each other. And
it's like, where do the adults go? They left the room.
Yes, they are not there. I can promise you, when we're navigating arguments, it's like there's no adult over there. We're dealing with adaptive children. They're just surviving in that fight. They're learning how to survive.
You're coping by surviving.
Yes. And you've coped your whole life with that.
Right.
Right. You've carried that. So there's a lot of grace and a lot of compassion and understanding. And that has to couple the hard questions. We have to ask the hard questions and draw the hard line of not allowing you to stay stuck in your victim story after a while. I mean, I think some people need to be in it till they can recognize it. But at some point, it's like, once you're in that and you can't recognize it and you are determined to stay there, I can't do anything.
Right.
I can't help you anymore. And I can just love you there. And that's okay for people. They'll go as far as they can in their coaching journey or their healing journey. And it's okay. I recognize when it's time for them to say, I need a breather. And sometimes people take a year off and then they're like, I'm ready again. Let's do this. And we start taking it on again. And we get past the briar patch this time. And then sometimes they need a coaching break because the healing, this stuff, you have to make room in your life for it. And if you don't, I believe it'll lead you to a health crisis that requires you to take the time to do this work because, like I said at the beginning, we are here to heal. It's relentless. It will get our attention in one way or another.
100%.
So, well, thank you, Kristen. And thank you guys for hanging with us in this podcast. And I hope that you're taking away some insights and some ways that you might be able to heal your relationship by taking more responsibility for what is triggering the relationship and each other. And as always, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear how this landed and how you're using this. Kristen and I love getting messages from you. Also, if you know people who are struggling, share our podcast. We are growing. We are excited about our growth, but we rely on you. We grow by all of you sharing what you're learning and highlighting our podcast so that we can continue to reach more people. That's our mission. So give us some feedback, give us a review, give us 5 stars, whatever that is, whatever that looks like. Share it with your friends. And again, go be good to yourself, be kind to yourself, be patient with your growth, but let your growth be strong. Take care. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope you found a spark of wisdom to carry with you and maybe even a deeper invitation to heal and grow and transform through your own beautiful story. Or maybe this episode made you think of someone who could use encouragement. And if so, I hope you will share it with them. If you'd like to learn more about working with me or attending one of my healing retreats, coaching programs, and other offerings, you can visit my website at jennyaiello.com or email me directly at jenny@jaiello.com. You'll find all the links in the show notes. If today's episode touched you, it would mean the world if you would leave a review or share it with someone who might need it, or just reach out and let me know how it landed for you. I'd love to hear from you. I'm building something special here. Real stories, real life, real connection. One episode, one heart, and one story at a time. As always, with love. Oh, and this is the legal message, but mostly a message from my heart. And I just need to share this with you right now. Please know this podcast is offered solely for educational and entertainment purposes. If you find yourself triggered due to anything that was shared in this podcast, please seek professional help. This podcast is not intended to be a substitute for mental health services. While I am a professional life coach, I am not a psychotherapist, nor am I a mental health clinician. So if you are struggling emotionally, please seek help because you matter, You are important. And most of all, you are worthy of doing this work, the work that leads you to a better and healthier place. Okay? All right. Thank you. And please always make enough time to take care of yourself and do so with love.